Right, here we go. Hello and welcome to the Friday webinar. We're back in 2026 and we got a very special guest today to kick off our webinars for the year ahead. Dr. Pilny, welcome. Hey, and a really important topic. So we're going to talk, and I just kind of connected. You've got like the atmosphere. We're kind of talking about flight, so it ties in. So
Closest
welcome,
thing I
Dr.
could find.
Pilny.
Thank you.
If you're just joining us, let us know where you're logging in from. You can even give us weather updates because our weather is all over the place this time of year, depending on where you are. It's sunny and awesome where I am in California. How about where you are, Dr. Pilney, in Arizona?
Yes, it's of course sunny and warm and beautiful here.
Nice. We can't complain. I mean, people got snow to shovel, so
Yeah, yeah. It's
um,
actually funny because I was going to mention, greetings from Arizona where it is sunny, 75 and perfect weather. And I decided to post on Facebook a meme about having 6 more weeks of sun and perfect temperature and blue skies. And quite a number of people felt like they should comment with the middle finger emoji. And I thought,
oh,
what kind of weather are you having where you are? So I know
oh
some
man.
people are in bad way too. So hope for better weather in spring soon.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, we got people coming from cold Minnesota to sunny San Clemente, and so all over the place. So, um, yeah, no, it's a gathering of or flocking together here virtually, which I love. That's one of the things I really do like about these webinars is that we bring our own kind of bird community together. So and to learn. So, I know you have a PowerPoint presentation for us, and I want to make sure we have time at the end, maybe for questions. So I'm going to let you take over as people log in. If you're just joining us, we're doing the Parrots flight and the need to soar. Take it away. This is it's a good topic.
Thank you again. I'm glad we collectively agree it's a good topic. And, in trying to always choose topics that are, both important for our companion parrots, but also trying to, think a little outside the box and think of different perspectives. And my goal, hopefully, is that, you learn something different or you pick up on some little pearl of wisdom that we didn't know about birds and, conventional thinking. And there are differences of opinions, of course, with a lot of topics. And I think it's good to review some of them. And so we'll take a fairly deep dive into flight. We won't be doing the sort of boring physics, aerodynamics type of thing. We're going to do the Pilny slant. We're going to look at some welfare issues. We're going to look at some aspects of evolution. We're going to talk about ways to prevent flight. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time harping on why we think birds should fly. So we'll get into it
I
here.
like it. The Pilney plan. That's my. I love
There we go.
that.
So the first slide hopefully gets people to wonder, why in the world would you ask what superpower do you want based on an introduction into this? And the reason that's there and the reason that I'm starting with that is that when people are asked what superpower would they most like to have, the number one answer is flight. When people want to, and maybe some people on this webinar have actually thought about it and at some point have said, flight would be an amazing superpower to just fly and be able to take off. And when you think about it, we have decided that we need planes and helicopters and hang gliders and those people who like to skydive. Don't invite me if you're going. And people who, they're interested in that flight suits, anything to simulate the idea of flight. And at some point, we decided we wanted to conquer the skies, but evolution never made humans able to fly. So when we think about it, and when we ask people, what superpower would you love to have? People would really like the ability to fly. And so let's really just talk a bit about it as it really centers around what we think about for our pet birds. I'm starting off also with a definition of fledging. The very concept and the very nature of fledging, when people think about it, specific to birds, is parent birds raise their kids, and at some point, the kids have to leave the nest. Nowadays, it's commonly used for human children. They joke about the millennials living in parents' basements. They fail to fledge and they don't leave home, but different definitions of it, but it's a fundamental basic sort of right and activity of birds. And the second definition here, bringing up a young bird until its wing feathers are developed enough for flight. And when those birds can fly, it's time to leave, begin their own lives. So consider the concept of fledging and how important that really is. And so why are we talking about flight and the importance of it? Because it's an intrinsic part of a bird's psychological well-being, one of my favorite topics in birds. Birds are designed for flight, and evolution has done a lot of things. Changes in their skeleton, changes in their respiratory system, difference in their muscle activity. Regular flight will exercise muscles. Regular flight stimulates their mental health. It's believed that it'll reduce stress and that it allows for the acting out of natural behaviors that we all want our birds to have a healthy lifestyle. And a lot of what I mentioned through here really is through some of the scientific literature is been presented at veterinary conferences. There have been discussions about flight and bringing our thinking back to the importance of it in pet birds. And so a lot of research on the psychological benefits of flight or the detriments of not being able to fly is something that we need to have careful consideration, and especially when we talk about wing trimming and other methods for deflighting birds. So we do know that studies indicate that regular flight does enhance muscle growth, it improves pet bird health, it supports cardiovascular health. I mean, this is no different than us going for exercise and having to go to the gym and get a morning walk in and get your 10,000 steps. I mean, we nobody could deny the importance of that. So why deny the importance of that with a bird? Sorry about that. So parrots have retained their flight capabilities despite a long period of time where maybe they haven't been allowed or it's been normal to prevent flight or different myths, which we'll touch on, that have led people to believe it's the only option for their birds. We definitely, when we look at it from a behavioral standpoint, we need these birds to functionally engage with the environment, and birds that can fly will do that. We perceive this level of engagement as confidence. Confidence is important for overall health and well-being. Foraging, which we've talked about, exploratory behavior, all of these different things are a foundation for improved behavioral outcomes. We've heard behaviorists tell us for years and years, birds should forage. We want to encourage that. Birds should fly. It's really their only form of exercise if you think about it. And then when we have flight, it facilitates a significant enhancement in their control over their environment. And I know sometimes you think, well, do we want them to have control over their environment? But we know that decision making and choice are fundamentally important to well-being. And we know they're really important to overall health. And we know they're important in decreasing undesirable behaviors. And we're also aware of, and we've also talked about, and we're not going to spend time here today, but concerns with the relinquishment and rehoming of birds because of the development of behavior problems that become unacceptable to some people. So when empowered, birds can cope better and adapt more successfully to any limitations a captive environment may have for them. So evolution, well, what happened over time? Well, in birds, they developed where scales became feathers. They don't have teeth. The anatomic changes where the torso got shorter. The bones got very light. The skeleton is filled with air in some places. And they have some skeletal fusion. So evolution said, you need less bones if you're going to fly. You need lighter bones. Maybe you don't need all those vertebrae. Let's fuse those together. There's not a urinary bladder, though you could argue there is a cloaca, but there's not a urinary bladder. Parrots, the females have adapted to have a single-sided reproductive tract, one ovary, one uterus, one oviduct. And then the heart and the respiratory system have adapted. And we're pretty familiar with the fact that birds' lungs are solid, fixed tissue. They don't inflate and deflate like mammalian lungs, but they have a complex system of air sacs that also help. So evolution has gone through a lot of changes to make flight work. It is sort of one of the most important ways to consider that it's their intrinsic right to fly, and it's what the natural world needs them to do. Just as a side note, picture here of the avian skeleton, and you can see there's a number of different changes there. Again, as I mentioned, there is fusion of vertebrae. There are some bones that are smaller. There are some bones that have fused to make the legs lighter. Just all these different anatomic adaptations that allow flight to happen. The top picture, as a side note, and I don't know if there's any dinosaur nerds in the audience, but a recent discovery is that they think this now is the first bird, and Archaeopteryx, who we've all been taught, is actually maybe more of a modified dinosaur with some feathers. And this dinosaur here might actually be the first true bird that developed, over the millennia, and then has evolved into all these adaptations that we now believe are functional and important for flight. Well, in the natural world, flight is absolutely vital for migration. It's one of the most important functions of flight in wild birds. If birds couldn't migrate, they would disappear. There would be no birds. Their seasonal migration is the movement for food, safe nesting sites. It's not always just cold weather. People think, oh, they're leaving before it snows. Most of these birds are adaptive to harsh weather conditions. Maybe you've even seen those videos of the nest cams of the eagles buried in snow. They can deal with cold, but they have other reasons why they have to migrate. And they'll travel, they establish routes called flyways. And without the ability to fly, there's no ability to migrate. These birds would not survive. Another important aspect in the wild is seed dispersal, and there have been some scientific studies and publications on this, but birds actually function as seed dispersers. And again, without this, the environment would be worse off. And there's a photo here from one of the publications about seed dispersal where they actually studied how far birds travel with seeds. They transport seeds. They do it through a number of different mechanisms, either carrying seeds, either eating them and then pooping them out, or even adhered to their feathers or stuck to them. And they disperse large seed plants, sometimes trees. There are certain palm trees that they disperse the seeds of. They give a germination boost, so as seeds pass through the gut, sometimes that's actually what it takes to get some of these seeds to germinate. And of course, very importantly, the ecological impact of seed dispersal. Wide variety of plants, wide variety of seeds, it plays a role in shaping ecosystems. And we know that's one of the problems is damage and changes to our natural ecosystems that are affecting these birds. But it's really important to think of how we can link flight to seed dispersal to a huge functional importance of flight in the wild. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, we're not going to go into sort of the physics of flight, but we know how flight works. We know what it takes to happen. It's sort of a cooperative between muscles, between bones, ligaments, tendons, strength of those muscles, and the ability to actually maintain that flight. So there's aerodynamic issues, the shape of the feathers, the ability to flap and get that power stroke, the ability to soar and maintain flight. Again, we've talked about all those evolutionary adaptations that birds have that make flight almost look effortless for them, but it is a complex and taxing sort of workout for these birds. Different types of flight. They're actively flapping, they're gliding, they're soaring. There are birds that maintain flight for extended periods of time and just never land. And so it's something that they need to be able to do. They're specialized to do it. And again, it's what they do. It's a bird. They fly. It's their thing. It's what they do. The wing anatomy, basically, when we're looking at the feathers, the feathers are a huge component of flight, of course. When we name them, we look at the primaries and the secondaries, and then the other feathers, the coverts. Now, the primary feathers are the ones that we're familiar with because we think those are what allow flight, because we know if we cut those primary flight feathers, a bird is essentially deflighted. And we do number them from 10 to 1 for the argument's sake of the typical parrot. They have 10 of them, numbered from the outside in. And when we think about trimming them, those are the feathers that we would be cutting depending on the type of bird, the species, and what our wishes are, that's where we're actually going to trim those feathers. So I did mention we're going to touch on some of the welfare considerations when we think about flight and how important it is. Again, ethical consideration in pet bird care really looks at environmental enrichment. The zoos have made a huge focus on environmental enrichment. There's been a big push even in pet reptiles, where people have forever not realized that pet reptiles will engage with their environment. They'll use puzzle feeders. They'll climb a wall if there are pegs there. There's been a huge move towards the understanding and basic need for environmental enrichment. And in some research, it's shown that flying actually will increase appetite, will increase birds' happiness, and a willingness to partake in cognitive tasks, things that keep them busy so they're not just sitting there in a cage bored and pulling their feathers out. Again, we need to question the experience of life through the perspective of a bird. Well, we can't really do that. Ethnobiologists and biologists, researchers, we want to pretend we can understand the experience of life through something else, but through something as foreign as a bird to a human, that becomes really difficult. And considering that keeping birds disrupts natural behaviors, what are the birds feeling? Are we removing a sense of freedom? Is it dangerous to go so far as to say it might be unintentional neglect if we ignore the uniqueness of flight because we've decided that no birds get to fly in captivity for various reasons? And so, again, the psychological benefits. These birds are better able to exercise their own autonomy. They make choices through the day and they express more of their natural behaviors. They engage in foraging, they collect nest material, they visit with owners. They're also thought to be less at risk for developing fear based behaviors. If you think about it, a bird that's flighted, that develops more confidence, that's more engaged in their environment, that's less fearful of their environment, may be less likely to develop any fear-based behaviors, especially, we've often targeted African gray parrots as being the classic ones who often show those fear-based behaviors. You put a new toy in there and they're scared to death of it and won't go near it until it gets moved out of their cage. So, they're better able to cope with stress. They recover quicker, and they can also know they can use flight for escape. And people have known that that's a really important aspect in the wild is our belief that a bird understands that they know, the historic flight or fright. I'm scared, something's wrong, something's coming to eat me. I better take off, better get into the treetops. The knowledge of doing that is pretty much an empowerment of sorts. And so I put a reference here down to a publication, but flighted birds make an abundance of choices out of their cages that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So it is a huge sense of empowerment. Essentially, a bird is flight. Choices about if they should fly may be based on personal opinion, may be based on habit, may be based on fear. I know that I've talked, I think, in previous lectures when flight has come up, that I'd like to believe it's a birthright and it's possible for all our companion birds. But we often have, and I have met people who, when I ask them, why do they want their birds' wings trimmed or why do they do it? They just say, oh, I just do it as part of their annual checkup. Oh, I bring them in for their annual exam and the vet just cuts their wings and trims their nails as part of their annual checkup. And I'm like, that's not part of a checkup. That's not an automatic thing. That shouldn't be done out of habit, and that shouldn't be done without at least a discussion of whether we want to consider the option for your bird to fly. Again, everything about a bird's affected by the need and ability to fly, including their emotional status, their psychological, physical structure, and a lot of that really revolves around the ability to fly. So we'll touch a little bit on wing trimming and methods of deflighting. Of course, understanding the nuances and best practice and the impacts anything we do on a bird's welfare is something we need to think about, talk about, and make the most informed decisions, especially veterinarians and especially if we're doing things out of habit. Whereas wing trimming is a very common grooming procedure to block flight. It needs to be done correctly to ensure safety. Historically, it was believed it was necessary for dependence during socialization and training. That's been called into huge question, and many places outside of the US inherently disagree that that's a necessary reason to trim. And then, of course, hazards in the home, and we'll touch on that. But counseling clients on the value of flight is really important. Every single time a client says, "Can I get a wing trim?" I say, "Why? Do we need to? Is it safe for this bird to fly? Can we set up a way for that to happen? Can we just spend a few minutes talking about it? I'm not going to necessarily have to convince you. I just hope I can give you some things to think about and maybe we can change our mind." And I have seen in the last couple of years a lot more people who just never thought about it. They just thought you deflight a pet bird. You don't want to risk them flying away. You don't want them to get loose. They have the reasons that they've convinced themselves, but they've never even considered, hey, could I safely let my bird learn to fly? Is this something that I should do? And I think that's the key part of it. There are a lot of people who believe that wing trimming can relate to onset of feather destructive behavior. There are conditions where some birds have had wing trims and as a result don't grow normal flight feathers. I mean, maybe some of us have even had birds that have had that. We've seen birds where trims were not done right and it's affected the molt and it's affected the fact that they don't shed out those feathers like they should. And then they have these retained feathers. There's a host of problems that could be linked to it. But again, consider welfare-oriented perspectives. If a bird were to fall because they can't land properly, are we inducing pain? If they can't escape predators, is that a worse situation? And when we talk about predators, unfortunately, sometimes those are in the home and sometimes those are other pets. So the ability to escape that is important. They become completely dependent on humans. We know that birds, baby birds especially, can imprint on humans. Like we have decided that animals should imprint on a completely different species, which we then know leads to a different type of relationship. It leads to behavior problems, it leads to reproductive issues. It's theorized that the birds then see you as their only option for a mate. And when they need a partner to build a nest and lay some eggs, you're the only option. It starts creating some problems. So if we saw flight as empowerment, if we saw it as a biological right, if we believe that it affects mental well being, it's probably something we'd all be doing and probably wouldn't consider taking it away without specific and unique situations. So I did want to mention here too, it's really interesting. This is a point of active research where they're actually doing these high resolution CT scans and they're actually able to find differences in the skeletal bone structure of birds that fly versus birds that don't. Positive things in the skeleton versus negative things in birds that don't fly or have never been able to fly. So if that data comes out, we may actually have some more hardcore proof that the absence of exercise and flight is actually physically harming these birds, leading to medical conditions, and that might lend a bit more weight to the need to do it. So we'll talk a little bit about wing trimming. Anybody that has a bird is probably familiar with this. Deflighting a bird deprives them of flight, normal behavior. Flight allows the expression of certain behaviors that they no longer are able to do. The potential negative welfare issues associated with deflighting certainly are risks of pain and discomfort, the total loss of the ability to fly, stress of capture and restraint. Advantages may include a reduction in the need to confine or cage birds for escaping. And I know that's one that people have always worried about. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a bird that's gotten loose, gotten out of a home, flown out of a screen or a window. A child has left a door open. Certainly escape is a concern, but again, there are ways around all of that. Zoos, of course, have to deal with that. They've come up with ways around it. Historically, when birds were deflighted to keep them in open aviaries, well, now they've decided they'll just screen those aviaries in and let the birds fly. So there is definitely a balance, but I think it's also important for us to realize a lot of countries outside the US have regulations or restrictions regarding deflighting methods. I mean, there are countries in Europe that believe it is inhumane. They've escalated concerns with tail docking and ear cropping and declawing cats. And a lot of these procedures that have largely banned in other parts of the world, well, we're moving into birds now and we're looking at whether we should consider deflighting as an inhumane procedure to do to a bird. You can see this picture of the macaw at the top. That's either feathers are growing out or it's just sort of a confused wing trim there. But we want to make sure that these birds are not in harm's way by our wing trimming. So again, the standard method is the standard wing trim, involving typically three, five, sometimes seven of those primary flight feathers. You can see in this image where we should be cutting and how we should be doing this. Again, it's numbered 1 through 4, but remember those feathers are 10 on the outside. So we're cutting basically 10, 9, 8, 7, maybe 6, 5, to ensure that that bird cannot get flight, but should be able to land, should be able to be balanced. We never want to trim one wing because that will make the bird imbalanced. And some people like to do what they call the show cut, where you leave numbers 10 and 9, like pictured in this bird. This bird, unfortunately, had an improper wing trim. You can see it's a little bit of a butcher job there, but some people like to leave those two outermost feathers. It does not do anything. It is purely an aesthetic choice. Deflighting is all or none. You either trim enough so they can't fly, but leaving a couple of feathers or leaving those outermost is a personal preference. It doesn't really change anything and it's not going to allow them to fly. It's also not going to allow them to have any more advantage in landing. So if we're doing wing trimming, the classic standard method, it's trimming those primary flight feathers. Again, where to cut, how to trim. We don't want to cut any other feathers when we do a wing trim. There's the skinny trim method that was developed a number of years ago. And then I presented at conferences. Todd Driggers, a veterinarian here in Arizona, made it, I think, brought it to mainstream. And this is a different method where instead of cutting the feathers entirely off, we're sort of just cutting up the length of the feather, as you can see in these two pictures here. It's believed this may be more aesthetically pleasing. It may allow less trauma, more normal molt cycles, reduce the risk of breaking blood feathers because of protection there. And some people actually just prefer this. It does deflight the bird, but they do get to keep those feathers. It takes a bit more time, a little bit more skill than just being able to take scissors and cut, but it's the second method to deflight a bird. The third method, which I hope nobody does, but is a procedure, is pinioning. And we've heard of this before. And this is a surgical amputation. Basically, we're cutting the tip of the wing off. The distal portion of the wing, the metacarpus and the phalanges, those bones, is removed, effectively preventing flight. It's a technique that's used in zoos. It's a technique that's used in resorts that have maybe flamingos in an outdoor enclosure and they don't want them to leave. It's a technique that will permanently deflight a bird. It's a surgical procedure. It is still done in some animals, people that don't want waterfowl to leave their property, chickens. But I did want to mention here the Association of Avian Veterinarians has a position statement that says pinioning for deflighting, it's only an acceptable practice in birds that have injuries that require amputation or in flighted species that are kept in open enclosures. So it should not be considered an acceptable practice in companion birds as a substitute for wing trimming. And I agree with that. I don't think we should cut off the tip of the wing as an attempt to deflight a bird. The other technique is tendinectomy, and then the other is tenectomy. These also are surgical procedures. The tendinectomy is basically cutting the extensor tendon in the wing, which allows a bird to extend that wing and fly. So it's a surgical procedure to cut a tendon, so it basically makes the bird unable to flap their wing. It is a permanent method, but it sometimes does fail, and there are some birds that have even had that tendon transected and still actually can fly. And then tenectomy is of the muscle, and this is another procedure where you're cutting the connection of the muscle in an attempt to prevent that bird from being able to flap the wing. And that also has not been predictably shown to work. Though these are techniques that are known, they're techniques that probably are still done. But I think if we're talking about the absolute need to deflight a bird, we probably need to consider sticking with just our standard methods of trimming those flight feathers as needed. And then species considerations certainly come into wing trimming. The effectiveness and approach might change based on the bird. Heavier body birds, like some African grays, which are basically flying bricks, they learn to fly, or when they are out, they tend to fall and just sort of splat. And you sort of wonder why they didn't try to land more gracefully. Some of those heavy body birds. But then you've got small birds like some of the conures that get a wing trim and they're still flying around. And you're like, how are you doing that? You don't have the feathers in the anatomy. So do have to make certain considerations for these birds based on the different types of species. And when we do wing trim them, we want to conduct that flight test. We want to make sure they can safely land. We make sure they can glide to the ground, and we make sure that they can't get lift and flight, and then decide if we need to trim more feathers or decide if we don't need to trim as many, but making sure we've done it right if we're doing it. Again, as I mentioned, in Europe, clipping a bird's wings is actually considered to be animal cruelty in some countries, and they think it shouldn't be practiced by respectable bird owners. They believe it does damage the emotional and psychological health, and that they think that it may lead to some of the behavior problems we deal with in birds. It's completely illegal to wing trim in Germany, so don't take a pet bird to a vet there because they're not supposed to do it. Again, if we do trim, we have a reason that we need to do it. Ensure it looks cosmetically appropriate. Make sure we've trimmed the right feathers the right way. Make sure we flight test them, but always again consider the general rule that birds should fly. Whenever, if ever, and however possible, they should fly. Even if it's as simple as a lot of people who will take their budgies into the bathroom and put them in a smaller space and let them fly around for 2 hours. Many of these birds can be trained to retire back to their cage when they're done, making it easy enough. And especially when I, again, practiced in New York City, sometimes that's what a lot of people did, small apartments. But if the birds could be loose in a bathroom or a small room, it was still an opportunity for them to have flight time. So think about the need and the benefits of it. Again, cut the right feathers, know how we're trimming. Here's another picture based on what we just talked about. Something went wrong. This is a bird that now is prone to potentially having accidents, falling, and getting hurt, and we don't want that to happen. Flight needs to be all or none. Sometimes clients will say, can you just trim a little so they can have a little flight? And I have to say, no. Either we're not going to let them fly or we're going to leave the feathers and allow it. So I have to balance the safety of it with what we need to do to decide whether flight is something that is going to work. Again, why are we doing it? What are the reasons? Is it necessary? The biggest thing I hear is ceiling fans and mirrors. Normal, healthy birds that know how to fly don't fly into windows or walls or mirrors, although I sometimes hear that some do. I have people who say when we first got him, he flew into a wall, so we've kept his wings trimmed ever since. And I'm like, you could try again now that the bird's older and more mature, and maybe that was a one-time accident, but a normal, healthy bird will not fly directly into a wall. A ceiling fan, that's different. They don't know how to avoid those. So if you've got a ceiling fan in every room running on high all day, no, I don't recommend your bird fly around with that. Again, think about the negative effects of it, and the potential for muscle loss, weight gain, and lack of exercise. Again, let's do it right if it's done. If you take birds to a pet store or a groomer and they're not doing something right, feel free to educate them, feel free to share with them. Make sure that only the right feathers are cut the right way. It should look very aesthetically normal if it's done right. Those cut edges tuck under the coverts, and you won't see cut edges or badly trimmed, or, I hate to say it, butchered wings, but I use that term often. So being careful. Again, people often say it's not safe for them to fly. They're going to fly into the stove. They're going to fly into the toilet and drown. How do I prevent all of these things? Well, if you have a flighted bird, just like any other pet, you need to bird proof and be careful and make sure that you pay attention to possible dangers in the home. There's no reason not to keep toilet lids closed. Here's a picture of a bird safe fan. So, and I do know people that have done this. They want to have fans and they want to have flighted birds. So they've replaced ceiling fans with bird safe fans. And there's a number of different models of these. I know some people that have made adaptations in their home. They've renovated a bird room to make sure that outlets were not accessible to the birds. They've decided to put tiles so the birds can't chew the wall. We can think outside of how we could make this work. The middle paragraph here is really important. Parrots are learners. We know that they're so smart. They figure things out. They have a high level of intelligence. If they can keep themselves safe in the wild, they can do it in our home. And yes, accidents can and do happen. Many years ago, I adopted a gray parrot who came to me with trimmed wings and a long history of feather destructive behavior. We were going to work through all of that. But as part of it, the decision I made was to allow her to fly. And it took a long time for her to learn how to fly. Dare I say, once she became an expert flyer, she decided that after she flew around and decided it was time to land, the oven was the place to land. Somehow she got convinced that no matter how long she flew around the house, when she was done, she'd make her way to the kitchen and the landing pad was my stove. And so I had to be extremely careful about that. I had to be always on top of that. I had to make sure that I didn't leave an open pot of boiling water or keep the stove on. Or I knew that if I had to cook or do things, that was cage time. I mean, it's just a matter of preparing and being on top of those things. Anticipate possible problems, make changes to the environment, and do the things we need to do. And lastly, we think about it. Is it fair to say, can parrots completely enjoy physical, mental well-being, health? Can they do all of these things with, in a sense, um, without flight? Can they have mental health without flight? We have to ask ourselves those things and we have to decide whether we think that's something that affects our decision making in our companion birds. A note on the British Veterinary Zoological Society. They have this list that's published, and they developed a belief that flight is part of the normal natural behavior and regarded as an essential need under their Welfare Act. This is the legally, sort of covered Animal Welfare Act. The use of flight restraint is only acceptable if there's a benefit in terms of welfare. In the zoos, they need to be subjected to ethical review and the welfare impact. So these are the kind of standards that I love seeing for animals and for our pet birds. Flight restraint should be decided case by case. It's not acceptable for cosmetic reasons, aesthetic reasons, or as a universally applied husbandry procedure. And I think that's key. And then pinioning, like we talked about, cutting off the wingtip should be avoided by the use of other different appropriate enclosures and other methods and not having it be a default way to prevent flight. And then a little bit about free flight training. And this is something that comes up if you're working with birds, into birds. Oops, sorry. Did I unshare
I can still see your screen.
my correct screen?
It's the SLO man free flies parrots.
Okay. I don't know, my screen minimized and went back to the normal screen, but we're on the appropriate lecture slide, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Just like we talked about before the lecture, we're always like, is anything going to go wrong? And sure enough, yeah, my screen did something. But a note on free flight training. Uh, let me see what we have here. I need 1 second. I apologize.
No worries. I accidentally ran into this guy when I was in the area years ago. I saw
Okay.
birds flying. I'm like, where are they coming from?
My screen is misbehaving. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare for a moment, okay? Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So yeah, note on free flight training. It's really popular. It's become something that people are aware of and are noticing. And some people are huge fans of it. I'm glad to see like you recognize this with this free flight. People are fascinated by it when they see it. I know when I used to see people who would free flight their macaws in Central Park, it's amazing to see that. And it's so interesting to think about the level of training that is going to work, that these birds don't leave, but they actually get that exercise. And last October at the Association of Avian Veterinarians conference, they brought Dan the Birdman, who brought his macaws and did a free flight demonstration and gave a lecture about how to train, how to work with it, and how to do it. So many owners successfully do this. And from a welfare perspective, it allows a natural, enriching experience. Like, it's compared to taking a dog to the dog park to run in a bigger, safe space. If you're interested in this, if you're interested in seeing what the communities are, search Google, search YouTube, social media. There's a lot going on, a lot of interest. There are groups that meet up in places to free flight their birds. It's become something that we should really consider with the safety levels, of course, but something that is really welfare enhancing and something that is really important. And it's fascinating to watch. Even if you just watch the YouTube videos, it's pretty interesting. Again, position statements, we rely on organizations like this to speak up and come up with position statements and help us set up better welfare. So, permanent anatomic alterations. Basically, the organization does not support surgical procedures that do these type of things. And embedded within this are procedures that are meant for deflighting birds. So, basically, we want to think about surgical, cosmetic, or any of these procedures are associated with risk. And if they're not essential, they affect the general welfare of birds. And that's really what we're talking about here. So know that it's important that if you have a belief, we should talk about it. If it's something to debate and discuss, that's always an option. But we want our governing organizations to really set the standard for what we believe is the best welfare for birds. And so, thank you for your attention today and letting me talk about flight and how important it is. We want to promote safe flight in birds. Think outside the cage, let them exercise. If in fact you believe that flight is essential to mental health, mental well being, physical health, and is an important intrinsic right with birds, let's just make sure we have a move towards as much flight in our pet birds as we can safely allow them. Thank you.
Great. Let's see. Do you have time? We do have some questions on flight.
Sure. I'll do my best.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Is it possible to encourage an older bird, an African gray specifically, to fly when he has never flown before, other than panic fluttering to the ground? The vet says he's healthy enough. He has flight feathers and sometimes exercises his wings by hanging on to the top of the cage with his feet and flapping, but he's never tried to fly. And he's lived with them for 2 years and has an unknown history. So,
So the simple answer is yes, because the simple answer is any bird can fly, learn to fly, and is adapted to doing so. It is not uncommon for birds who have never been allowed to fly, encouraged to do so, or have done it to just not do it. I mean, I know people that have birds that have never had wing trims and never fly. They just choose not to fly. If they try to get them to fly, they kind of just land on the ground. A small percentage of birds decide that flight's not just something they're going to do, but to answer it directly, any bird of any age can learn to fly. We see this proven time and time again in our sanctuaries and our shelters and our rescues, where birds come in with trimmed wings and they're allowed to then not have that procedure done and encouraged to learn to fly. the vast majority of them will develop and learn how to fly safely, even if they're an older bird that's never done that. And I would encourage people to do that. Exercises to learn to fly. A lot of people talk about wing flapping. They hold the bird on their hand and drop their arm, and the bird flaps. We've seen birds that will hold on to the top of their perch. Somebody actually just sent me a reel on Instagram of a bird on its play stand, and it starts flapping so hard it like wheels the play stand across the room because it's on wheels, and it drives it around by flapping its wings. So there's all different in-betweens in there. But yes, a bird can learn to safely fly, learn to navigate, and learn to keep themselves at a danger as long as that's something that we commit to.
Okay. And then someone has said that their breeder did a light wing trim on the bird before they brought him home, and they didn't know that ahead of time. Otherwise, they would have opted out. So they were told it was for safety. Is this something that a common practice for breeders when they send birds home? Do they trim, or in your experience?
Yes, and part of the reason is there's a historical myth, and I believe a lot of people now accept it as a myth, that if we need to trim their wings as part of socialization, that breeders and pet stores will do this. They generally will not send a bird home from the pet store without a wing trim. They'll often not do it for finches and canaries, but budgies and conures and other birds almost always leave as a standard practice. And the thought is they need to be deflighted for socialization, for training, for bonding. And it is a typical thing that they do. I think that there are a number of breeders who have over the years learned that some of these practices actually are detrimental, along with parent rearing versus human rearing. And some of these may have long-term better outcomes. And so there are some breeders who will ask people, do they want the wings trimmed or not? But it still remains somewhat of a reflexive standard practice to trim those wings so you can take your new baby home and they'll be, grounded, and they'll be able to be socialized without the risk of them flying. But the ability for them to fly is not going to affect the bond and the nurture and the care you provide for them.
Okay. And then a question, is there anywhere in the US that's considering making trimming illegal, like it is in Europe? Is there any talk of any laws?
Nope, nope. And this is something that we realize and we talk about. Actually, in my home state, there was recent legislation by our state governor about enhanced animal welfare. Again, dogs and cats are what come up first. But we've had an unfortunate situation the last 20, 30 years. The sort of political arena of the United States just doesn't have room for animal law. It's the lowest priority. And so advancement of animal law, animal welfare issues has been a huge problem. We know that it took 20 plus years to get birds covered by the Animal Welfare Act passed when they said they would have that legislation. So, the answer is no. There's nobody really looking at making it, in a sense, illegal. And that's why we're sort of talking about just consider the welfare aspects and consider whether it's right for your bird.
Okay. And then someone, same person, what is the safe area in home to allow flight to minimize potential accidents? So bird proofing your flight area.
Yeah.
What
Some people have found it's a single room, like I mentioned, a bathroom, a bedroom, a place that doesn't have anything dangerous. If people are worried about windows, oftentimes a bedroom, you can close curtains, close blinds, prevent that from happening, and just give them a smaller area to practice and learn. A lot of people consider hallways, if you've got a long hallway, as a great area. There's often no windows. You can close doors to other rooms. It really depends on the individual home. It's a place that we think is safe. The important thing is it has to still be big enough for sustained flight. We don't want these birds to sort of flutter and just kind of get lift and then hover and then have to drop back down. That's a totally different situation. So depending on the home, but consider whether starting in a small, safe room, consider a long hallway, or even some people prefer to use a garage. Most garages don't have windows, and as long as it's a safe space for them and there's not a lot of risk of them getting into anything, sometimes that's a good idea.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I know that like in my household, we went to the craft store and we made little signs that we hang on the doorknob saying, birds out. Like, so be cautious if you're opening these this door to this door because, might
Yeah,
be,
perfect. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great.
But you can put your picture on, you draw, your portrait, bird portrait on that. And then
Right.
another thing that you mentioned earlier about like, so my bird's exact, the kitchen stove for some reason is like, yeah, it looks like a good spot to land. So I tested how long it takes when I boil water, when I turn off the stove, and how long it takes for the surface to cool. And it was
Uh-huh.
like still hot enough to like singe my, like 10 minutes later. It's like, it's a long cooling off period before those areas are even like cool to the touch again, just to keep that in mind, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that's great to know, and that's an important part of it. I see there's a comment here too. So there was a dinosaur nerd in the audience.
you did ask if there's anyone. Okay,
I
so
love it. And they made a great comment here. So, and then there's also a comment that someone's local PetSmart no longer clips wings and they were able to get unclipped budgies. So maybe the word's getting out and maybe there is some momentum and movement on this. So great to see that and great information on our bird dinosaurs. People love to still call our current birds little dinosaurs in a lot of different ways. So thanks for the comment.
oh, we do have I love the dinosaur nerd. Have you ever seen? I can't even imagine this, but has someone ever brought it like a wing trim on like a finch or a canary? I mean, those birds never seem to ever get. I mean, hopefully, like,
Yeah,
I would.
I honestly don't know, but I honestly don't think I would do it if they asked. So, unless there was a really good reason, I mean, because we do know wing trim's temporary, they're going to molt out those cut feathers, and the
Yeah,
feathers are going to come back most of the time. It's pretty rare that if it's done right, but I can't think of any small passerines that anybody's really wanted to have the wings trimmed. I mean, follow so much bird stuff on social media. And I see these people that take their birds outside flighted, and I'm just
yeah,
cringing a little bit because I don't know them or the bird's training, but they're taking even like their little canary out on their finger and it's singing and they're showing it their garden. But I'm like, in 1 second, that bird could leave. And the little birds tend to leave. The big birds, remarkably, the vast majority of people whose parrot has gotten out have gotten those birds back. They seem to recover them. I can't tell you how many clients have lost a bird but got it back. Even if it was a bird that was wing trimmed and got out of a door or got out of a broken screen. But
yeah.
those tend to get recovered. It's the little birds that tend to disappear. But I don't think I've ever trimmed. I don't think I would want to. Yeah.
No, I can't imagine. Those are the
Yeah.
ones when you think like a PetSmart, like like those are more common there now than other larger birds. But I can't imagine those going home with having any kind of trim on it.
Right.
Someone
Right.
wanted to ask, are there any studies that directly show flighted parrots have lower incidence of feather destructive behaviors?
There are no sort of valid published scientific studies. It's become something that is largely more either anecdotal. It is something that people believe that when we see birds with feather destructive behavior that do not flight or have had wing trims, we're recommending not doing those as part of the comprehensive management of feather destructive behavior. And we're sometimes seeing birds that do regain flight that have something else to do, that have something else to tire them out, and another activity, then those birds can forage more and do more. They will lessen their feather destructive behavior. I have a lot of clients who have told me that when they've allowed birds to fly, they feel like the birds do spend a lot less time on themselves over grooming. Even the people who have birds that have such a desire to over preen and damage their feathers that they do it while sitting on their lap. They do it sitting on their shoulder. Like the behavior is so deep they can't change it, will actually decrease a lot of those behaviors. I mean, if the bird gets a chance to fly around for a little while and they're a little tired and a little out of breath, and they're less likely to say, okay, now I want to spend all my time pulling my feathers out. So I hope at some point there will be research that's valid, that's published, that shows that it makes a difference. But I don't know of anything that's actually published. There have been some things presented at veterinary conferences, but veterinary conferences are not the scientific peer-reviewed literature that we think is the gold standard. They're often either observations or pre-studies or certain things in the work. But I would love it if we would get more science on some of these topics, especially to validate what we believe.
Okay. And just circling back to like creating like a bird friendly flight area in your home. Would you recommend like having station like some people set up like perches that they can fly to in certain areas to try to get them to coax them to certain areas of the home over others. Do you find that effective much?
It depends on the bird and it depends on their natural training. Many birds can be flight called. Some people are very successful calling their bird and having it come into the other room with them. Or many birds actually learn, like someone will go to the office and the bird will then decide when it's ready, it's going to fly, but it's going to go to the office where their human is, and want to hang out there. Or they're trained based on perches or tree stands, and that's the place they go. A lot of people who have the cage plus perch stand will maybe have the perch stand in another room where they want the birds to be, and the birds get trained that that's their other location. So, yeah, there are definitely methods to do that. I mean, there are birds who, even without training, potty train themselves. Sun conures and some birds are really good about that. They will go back to their cage to poop. So they'll fly. My dad has one of those and he's grateful for it, but the bird could be with him. And when it's ready, it flies back to the cage, no matter where he is, poops in the cage, and then flies back to him. So he never has to worry about it. I mean, I'm like, how did you train the bird? He's like, the bird came that way. It was a Father's Day gift I gave him 25 years ago. And
Wow.
he's like, the bird came that way. And I'm like, you lucked out because
Yeah, you got a lot of jealous bird people here.
spent a lot of my life with either bird poop or wearing rag shirts on your, those button ups or things just to protect it. Those people that have the bird turd shirts.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you get lucky, but some birds have those natural intrinsic flight patterns, and those birds can be trained to do other things like targeting or going to certain areas. Sure.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. Years ago, I found a budgie in a park, and within a week, I had him target trained because he's obsessed with watching Disco the Budgie parakeet videos on my phone. So as soon as he saw my phone screen, he would instantly fly onto my hand, and I was like, "That's easy."
There you go. Oh, remember Disco? Rest in peace. That bird was amazing.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. My resident mate was actually his veterinarian.
Really?
Yeah, so she was seeing him and treating him, and yeah, that was really fun. That bird, almost unbelievable.
Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
really neat. And there's some great comments in the chat. I mean, there's somebody saying they had a rescue, was a rescue sun conure that's now learned to fly, and they said it's added enormous quality to his life. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we like. Their budgies do zoomies around the living room several times a day and get out, and even somebody has a potty trained eclectus, so lucky them. But these are the things that we're talking about. Your perception, like Jill said, is my bird's quality of life is better since I let them fly. We want everybody to say that about every pet bird everywhere.
Oh, that's a great thing. And I think yeah, you said it was a birth, it should be considered almost like the birthright of your, so yeah. Um, yeah, someone said that it added enormous quality to the repels pair. You don't see those too much, right?
Yeah, it's really rare.
Um, wow, she learned to fly at 5. That's amazing. Yeah. Um,
Really
yeah,
great.
it's great too when you can get I mean, you just hold up your hand and they just, I mean, that's it's like the ultimate welcome, right? It's like a
Yeah.
hat.
Yeah, and that's really great. Years ago, I had a Patagonian conure who was like that, flight call trained. I mean, she understood when my hand went up in that position with two fingers, it meant this is where you land. And she never missed it. Like the same way a dog learns to sit, when you say sit and they put their little dog butt on the ground, she just learned that coming to my fingers was where you landed. So it's all possible. It takes time and it takes patience. But they absolutely, the one thing we do know and science has taught us, they have the learning ability to learn all of these things. It's just a matter of the commitment to training.
Great. Okay. Shoot, we got to the end of our time.
Right.
But do we have any, all these, yeah, a lot of, thank you. I mean, this was a great, you have like really like the topics. It's just you have a nice way of presenting um, topics that are either like a new take on something or something we haven't covered before. So I know I appreciate, and a bunch of everyone on today really appreciates this.
Well, that's the goal. We want to cover things that haven't been, but we want to cover things that all of us as bird lovers, bird owners, people who care, that's our chosen thing. Um, we all want what's right and appropriate and best for them. And, a lot of times, most of it is just think about it. Maybe think about a new perspective, maybe hear it, maybe disagree with it. That's great. That's part of life. But at least be open. The famous expression, learn, unlearn, relearn. It's all part of what we do. So I love that. And these comments are great, and the chat is great. And people who care about their birds and care about bird welfare, that's our kind of people.
Yeah, and the fact that we're all here on a Friday, that you're giving your time to us and people are joining us, that says a lot right there.
That's
So
great. I really
um,
appreciate people attending these webinars.
yeah, and so next Friday we have your colleague, Dr. Lamb, will be on with us on a heart tugging topic. She's going to cover saying goodbye. So she's going to talk about topic of euthanasia. So um, a very important topic, but one that yeah. So
Yep.
join us next Friday for Dr. Lamb's
Very
talk.
important topic. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that one will be an hour earlier at 11 a.m. Sorry, I'm going off of Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. my time. So instead of like the noon start time, we have my time. It'll be an hour earlier next Friday. So,
Perfect. Well, thank you again for allowing me to speak.
oh my goodness, anytime. I can't wait to see what topic we have you with the next time you're on. So
Great.
we'll
Look
figure that
forward
one
to it.
out. Stay tuned. And so, all right. On
Take
that note,
care.
guys, thank you so much, Dr. Pilny. That was I'm gonna you can go back and watch this recording and you can see the slides if you're with us or share with other people. It's an important topic. It'll be on the Lafeber YouTube channel, so you can rewatch and send out to people that you that have birds, your bird loving friends. All right, guys. On
Take
that note,
care.
everyone have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again, Dr. Pilny.
You're welcome.
Next
Bye-bye.
time, all the best to you and your flock. Bye, guys.
Bye.